Okay, so this is a totally different background than normal. This is the school area. I kind of made this little space for myself with this new typewriter. Well, not new, this typewriter that's like almost 100 years old that I painted and scrubbed. Well, first I sanded it and scrubbed and oiled it, and I bought every single key working, and I even replaced the old felt that was like falling apart. I know that this is upside down, the ribbon, but I have to get a new ribbon anyway because that ribbon doesn't fit, and I even tried putting it in upside down, trying to get it to work, and I finally just determined that the holes aren't lining up, and that's why it doesn't work. It's not going to work. This ribbon will never work, so that's why it's upside down. And it also was dried out anyway when I got it, so I put 3 layers of primer and then 3 layers of yellow paint, 2 layers of varnish. It's all shiny and beautiful. I spent so long on this thing. This is what I've been doing this week while the kids are doing school and I'm sitting here, and there was a day when school took 10 hours. That's how I feel about school right now. Anyways, that's not what we're talking about today. And oh, my shirt, you can only see it says, sorry I'm awkward, but actually then down here it has a little tiny sorry too, which I thought I'd show that to you because the top doesn't really make sense without the bottom. And then these are my moss balls, which is all that's in the fish tank right now. I know the water's cloudy. It's because I had this experiment with the dirt that's on the bottom because it's really a plant tank that's just gonna have a couple tiny little fish, and that's totally not what this video is about, so let's just get on with this. Sadie and Patrick and James all tested as having ADHD. Maggie and Tessie have not been tested for ADHD, but basically everyone who has ever worked with them say that they have it. When you have a kid that's less verbal, at least where we are, they aren't tested for ADHD. It's just you won't get that diagnosis. I've heard lately several times that it's not possible to get an autism diagnosis and an ADHD diagnosis. I read that a few times in the last week, and I mean, we got it. We were given both during our neuropsych exam. Basically, as with autism, ADHD around here seems to have a strong genetic component for us. Some people here tend to lean more towards the impulsive, hyperactive side. Some people tend to be more inattentive. Obviously, I tested as inattentive because I got the combined type. I'm combined, Sadie's combined, I'm combined, Sadie's combined, Patrick's combined. Paul, he just had the inattentive part, which I mean, he is super inattentive. When you're trying to talk to him, you'll see him just like, I think I probably say, are you listening to me 1,000 times a day when he's home? And he isn't. I don't think he is very impulsive, so there is that. Maybe he isn't hyperactive, so maybe it was right. Maybe he does just have ADD. If that's the difference, I'm not sure. James didn't get the inattentive type. Today, what I wanted to talk about was ADHD. I've never really talked about just ADHD and our family. So I have talked about when I was diagnosed with ADHD, and just to backtrack a little, and for anyone who's new here, my name is Cami. I am autistic. I have ADHD and anxiety, throwing some depression there that's under control right now, and I'm a mom with 5 kids who one is being diagnosed right now. The doctor who's diagnosing him, the last time I spoke with her after the neuropsych eval, said she was certain that he is also autistic, but he was also diagnosed with ADHD at that evaluation. He actually did just have the ADOS early, and so we're going to be getting those results the first week in December, but not getting distracted. I just started with one video and got distracted, and now I'm making a totally different video. That is ADHD. If you're new here, my husband and I are both autistic. 4 of our 5 kids have been diagnosed as being autistic, and 1 is in the process, as I just said. But what I want to talk about today is something I've talked about a lot less than autism, is ADHD. When I was going through the process to find out if I was autistic, which was something I suspected, and I mean, I knew I had anxiety. I knew I was, anxious, very anxious. Just like I'd known I was depressed since like forever. I'd known I was depressed since college, so like that wasn't new to me. But when the results came back and the doctor said, you are hyperactive, and I was confused. And she just said that I was hyperactive. She didn't say I had ADHD. And so then I asked her and said, do you mean that I have ADHD? because Paul had gone through ADHD testing when we lived in Florida when he started law school. And the first time they said he had it, and then another doctor saw him and said he didn't have it. And it was just very frustrating. So I asked, are you saying I have ADHD? And she said, yes, you definitely have ADHD. And started talking about the different things that it meant. Like, I guess I scored a lot on the impulsivity part. I think that's where I scored the highest. There's this test where you go in the room, and it was the worst part of neuropsych testing for me, where they have you like, you're not supposed to hit the button, and when you hear, I think X, you can hit the button for any letter but not for X. I think that's it. And I competed I was really nerdy, and I competed in keyboarding in high school. I should be good at not hitting a certain letter when I hear a sound, and I was physically incapable of not hitting the letter. No matter how slow I went, I could not hit that X every single time they said X. It was I'd be like, slow, don't do it, and then I would have already hit the letter. And when I walked out when it was over, so frustrated with myself, I was like, that was really freaking hard. That was really, really hard. And the test giver person was kind of like, okay. Because I think I'd managed maybe not to hit it 2 times or something like that. I'd almost hit it every single time. Anyways, so yeah. So apparently I both failed the inattentive part, and the hyperactive part. How did they? I wonder what was even the hyperactive part test. I don't know. And I really failed the impulsive part, which I guess does make sense to me, and I think probably explains my entire college experience and a lot of my life. So that's how I found out that I had ADHD, and when she said you're autistic, I was not surprised. I was happy because it was something I'd suspected and it explained so much. But when she said you have ADHD, it wasn't that I was disappointed or anything. It was just a complete and total shock. And I followed so many ADHD pages because I knew Sadie had ADHD, and I knew Paul probably had ADHD. He hadn't had his 3rd test that confirmed that he has ADHD. And so it was just, I'd followed all these pages and I'd find myself laughing and relating to 99% of the things that they'd post. So I guess it made sense why, and should have maybe started to suspect it a little bit earlier because of that. Then at the same time I was getting Patch's results, our then 7-year-old, now 8-year-old, and he came back with the exact same thing: high anxiety, being autistic, and the exact same profile of impulsive, super hyper, and inattentive. So inattentive, because apparently he got the inattentive from his dad and his mom, and it just mushed together into a little ball of inattentiveness. I sometimes feel like 7, 8 is one of the hardest ages to have ADHD, because it was a hard time for Sadie too. And I think it's just that learning reading, it's such an age where you're learning so many basic skills for school. You're learning how to be in school and how to interact with peers. I don't know. I guess I've never had a kid that wasn't also autistic, and so maybe it's the mixture of being autistic and ADHD, but it just seems like it is kind of a struggle. In general, been kind of a hard time for each of our kids when they are at that age and figuring out how to learn, really. And that a short time after that, it kind of seems like things have start to click, but it's not my favorite age in terms of school and learning from my experience as a mom. I don't know how universal that is. And then there's James. It's so weird. I don't think I expected James to be diagnosed with ADHD, and I think that's because he doesn't have that inattentive component. It's so different with him because he's so strongly hyperactive and impulsive and bouncing off the walls. And the person who gave him his ADOS told me that it was really hard for him to do the ADOS because he told me he just talked the whole entire time, nonstop, and that it was hard for him to see past his ADHD and see anything other than ADHD. And when he said that, he said he was going to look at everything else. And I know that the doctor already has a strong opinion, so I'm really interested now to see if it is going to come out as him being autistic. He said we might have to retest in a few years and see then when he's a little bit calmer, which reminded me of Sadie, because when Sadie was 6, the exact same age James is now, she was tested at the exact same place, and she came back as having ADHD and not being autistic at that point in time. And I think it was for the same reason. I think that her ADHD was so prominent. She was just bouncing off the walls and talking nonstop and just so excitable that it was hard for them to see anything other than that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what it comes back as. He said, well, at least this is good that we're doing this now, because this will set a baseline and we'll be able to look at this in the future and compare it. I guess we'll see. But I definitely noticed that the biggest thing with James is that school's so much easier because he doesn't have that inattentive component. It's like he got a double dose of impulsiveness and hyperactivity. But in terms of learning, even though he's so much more hyper and he's always moving around, he can also focus on what's being said and learn it, even though he has a hard time holding still. It's really not so much that hyper piece a lot of the time that makes it hard to learn. It's that inattentive piece where your mind's drifting off to think of other things, like those special interests, like Pokemon or dinosaurs, or just spacing out a lot of the time. That makes it more difficult because, you know, I've seen with our kids how they can learn anything and everything about the subjects they're interested in with like supreme hyper focus down to the detail. But if it's a subject they're not interested in, that inattentive piece sometimes can feel like it's definitely the hardest hurdle, I think, in terms of learning. Now that I recognize that I have ADHD, I sort of have a love-hate relationship with my ADHD, and definitely probably the biggest part of my ADHD would be my impulsiveness. I think that's the strongest characteristic of it for me, because I feel like it is probably a pretty big part of my personality, and that's kind of it. ADHD is different than autism, but I can also see parts of it that definitely have been a strength to me over the years, like hyperfocus. If I didn't have ADHD, I don't think I'd be able to sit down and write for hours at a time, or write like 7,000 words, sit down and write 7,000 words at once. I know that's hyperfocus, and I know that's also why I get super irritated if I am writing and someone comes up and tries to talk to me. It's like I'm in the zone and I'm super irritated if you interrupt me. I've gotta like set a time limit, and this is when I'm writing and this is when it's done. It's why I usually do it at night when everyone's in bed. I usually write until like 1 in the morning, and then I get up at 6. And then Tessie and Maggie, I didn't believe when Tessie was in school that she was hyperactive, because she was so worn out from school that at the end of the day she came home and she was just tired and just half the time fell asleep as soon as we got home. But now that she's home, I see it. Everyone told me that she was the most hyper kid in her class. And I just never saw it, and now she is. She flipped over our couch like 3 times today. She removes the mattresses from her beds, from like 2 of her beds, like 10 times a day. She carries furniture around the house. She carried like a big chair down the stairs when I came out for dinner. She definitely has that sensory seeking, proprioceptive, needing to feel like her joints exercise need. And that combined with hyperactivity and impulsiveness, I'm not sure. She seems to have the hyperfocus on doing whatever is in her little mind. Even when she was tiny, like if she was given a task at OT, like to fit things, like fit a key into a slot, and the whole point was like that she wasn't supposed to be able to do it. We wanted her to ask for help so that someone could help her get like the toy out of the box, but she's like 2.5 or 3, and she would just sit there and work on the key and work on the key and work on the key and fitting it together, because Tessie likes fitting things together, and she wouldn't ask for help. She just gets really focused, especially when it comes to things like that, building things, putting things together. And then Maggie, she's definitely inattentive and gets more focused if she has caffeine. ADHD meds are completely off the table now for a very long time, because we did try a 1-month trial of ADHD meds with Maggie, and she lost 5 pounds, and she's already close to being underweight, and that was it. Not only did her anxiety go up, but she lost 5 pounds. So Maggie is not going to be trying anything else per her doctor's orders. Her doctor was like, nope, that's it, we're done. That was that one trial, her first trial at 10 years old, and it is over, and she dropped from 67 pounds to 62 pounds. So that is kind of our family's ADHD story, and how really individually it's affected us on a really basic, skimming the surface level without getting too much into it, because that would take more than one video. This is already a long video, so I'm going to say goodnight for now. It's nighttime here. So that's it for today. If you like this video, we would love it if you'd give it a thumbs up, and if you're interested in all things autism and occasionally ADHD, hit subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.